Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. My name is Zohreh Talebizadeh. I am the Principal Investigator and Senior Director of RareX, a research program of Global Genes, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. So let me first provide a little bit background about the objective of this panel discussion. The primary objective of this panel is to explore how we can harness the power of data to make meaningful differences for patients and enhance lives today. We will highlight or discuss a few examples of effectively utilizing various sources of data, including patient-reported data. And the rationale or reason for discussing this topic is that we are hoping that we can enrich the discussion on the value of data collection and expand our understanding of its potential applications. Because as you all know, we often focus on development of new therapies when we talk about benefits of data collection. But how else can data be used? How can all of these benefits of data collection be communicated in a way that motivates people to participate and stay involved? So that's our objective for this panel discussion. Now, I would like to invite each panelist to introduce themselves briefly before we begin the discussion. So, Wendy, I believe it's on.
Sure. I'm Wendy Chung. I'm a medical geneticist and pediatrician and have spent my career in terms of working on rare genetic diseases, and currently I'm the chair of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital and am the PI for Simon Searchlight and my team here. Yay, Simon Searchlight and Spark.
Yes, Jen.
I'm Jen Foss-Feig. My affiliation on the slides is my former affiliation. I was an investigator at Mount Sinai, working in autism and related neurodevelopmental disorders and biomarker development. I'm here today representing the Simons Foundation Autism Research Initiative, where I'm a senior scientist. And as part of that initiative, we work closely with Wendy funding the Simons Searchlight Project.
I'm Marianne Clancy. I'm Executive Director of the Cure HHT Foundation. HHT is a vascular disease affecting 1 in 5,000 people. I'm a patient. Representing the 1.6 million people globally with this disease, of which only 40% are diagnosed. So I've been in this position for over 2 decades, and the role of data has played a big role in our evolution to where we are now.
Fantastic. I'm so excited to hear that we have such a wonderful and diverse skill sets and background. So I'm really looking forward to learning from every one of you with respect to your perspective about data application. So I have a couple questions for each one of you. So if I may, I'm going to start with you, Wendy. So I have 2 questions, general questions. Feel free to, again, pick which one you want to start first. But they're related. So from your perspective as a physician and also researcher, why should individuals and communities care about data collection? And also, what are some ways you use data both in short term and long term that you would like to share with us?
Yep. So I often say it starts with the patient and ends with the patient. And I see patients all the time. And for rare conditions, sometimes I'll see something and I'll wonder to myself, is that just my one patient and that's just an odd thing? Or is it really this is a part of this rare condition and we're just early in our understanding of the manifestations? But it's something that the community, the larger community, should know. And so I'll give you an example that with many of the neurogenetic conditions, doesn't happen all the time, but I'll see cancer. And when I see cancer in a child, that's not a usual thing I should see. So I ask myself, is that just an odd coincidence or is it actually something? And so then we'll start trying to collect the data, not just on one person, but on a group of people and see whether or not that's a something that we see more commonly. And when we do, it has an immediate impact for the rest of the community, because things like that we can screen for. In some cases, if we make a diagnosis early, we can improve the outcome with treatment. And it could be cancer. We've had other conditions where we see with CTNNB1, we see something called a tethered cord within the spine, and that's something that can surgically be treated. Other conditions, there may be specific eye manifestations where we can actually preserve vision. But very quickly, we can take these observations, just regular clinical observations, but we can make them more robust by having greater numbers of people, and actually, importantly, take care of our community better. And there's a little other portion which is getting insurance to pay for it, because it's something that actually is a real thing. It's not just Wendy made this up. It's actually based on data.
That's fantastic. So it could definitely help with respect to early diagnosis and also better defining phenotypes. Am I correct? So, but then I'd like to see if you have, if you want to share any more thoughts with respect to how can we make those process more standardized, because part of it is observational, right? And then how can we generalize those observations which we know that are have biological, maybe not, I shouldn't say biological, but have some basis, but how can we expand those beyond just one clinic observation?
So to do this, and I think this, I'd actually like to listen to you all, to be honest, if I could. I know that's not set up for doing that way, but in doing this, you also have observations. So you're seeing things in your own family member, you're seeing things in your community. So this very much needs to be a conversation, sort of a brainstorming session. And then with that, how do you, in a robust and research way, collect the data to then generate the evidence to support what is intuition, your sort of mother's or father's intuition, my clinical intuition? How do we put that together? And how do we do this in a way, I call it frictionless, but how do we do it so it's not so burdensome? Because we're all incredibly busy. So how do we do this in a way that's not quite so burdensome? So I haven't got this all figured out, but in the session before, they let me wave a magic wand. So I'm going to take the prerogative to wave this magic wand again, and to say that you're already seeing doctors, you're already having things that are done. Is there a way that we can think of to be able to double up and use that information that's already being collected in some way and recycle it and reuse it and collect it together in a way that's consented, so it's transparent that as people are doing this, no one's doing anything underhanded with this, and maybe supplement that with things that are very specific and targeted that wouldn't otherwise be collected as part of clinical care, to be able to then prepare for what do we need to go to clinical trials? What do we need to do to improve the care today for the cures tomorrow? So how do we be able to think about both the short and the long term, but build this ecosystem so it's not so painful either for you or for us to be able to get to where we want to go?
That's fantastic. And I'm so glad you mentioned about the importance of kind of a co-developing, process, because observation by parents, by patient, is equally important, because if it doesn't come to the attention of the, again, clinician, then you don't have time to pay closer attention to that. So it's like a teamwork, right? So that's a great way to describe that. Thank you. So Jennifer, I have a question for you. How do you get information out to the community from your data collection programs, and why is this important based on your experience? I'm sure you have lots of great examples that you want to share with us, and we would love to hear that. And maybe I save the second question after this one.
Sure. I guess the goal in Simon Searchlight is to get data out to many communities. So one is the family community. So for all the data that comes in, wanting to be able to share that data back. So if a family is taking time to enter information about themselves or their child, when they enter the information, they can often see where their child falls within their community. Is their language more or less developed than others? What might be the long-term trajectory in the other people registered in Simon Searchlight? The Simon Searchlight team does registry updates at many of the family meetings to share the data back. So some is to the families and the patient communities, and then the other is to research. And researchers, if they have an agreement through their institution, are able to request the phenotypic and the genotypic data that are in Simon's Searchlight. They can download those, they can analyze them how they want, they can publish, and they can and they do. We receive dozens of requests for those data each month. Researchers can request animal models, they can request iPSC lines, and so those are shared with the research community as well.
Great. So am I correct? You also facilitate connecting sometimes researchers to families, and if so, are there any special kind of ways to do it besides just researchers coming to you and requesting data for specific population, or maybe based on specific maybe phenotypes?
Sure. I think this happens in a couple ways. So sometimes we'll have a request for our applications for grant submissions. So we had one, a human cognitive behavioral grant, and we encouraged applicants to work in the populations in Simon Searchlight or in Spark and to do their studies in those populations. Sometimes we'll have basic scientists, people who work in animal models, who will say, like, for example, I talked to someone a couple of weeks ago who was studying pain perception in the periphery. And her question was, I know the pain is altered in autism. Are there specific disorders where this is a real phenotype? And we talked about, can she look in Simon's Searchlight data? Can she ask that? And if that information isn't there, might she run what we call a research match study, where she initiates a project and she asks the community, what's your experience with pain? And through that, she would choose which animal model she develops and sort of follow the sign in the patients in where she takes her lab direction.
That's great. Again, maximizing, right, benefit of those, the use of those data by making those connections. I think this is great. And also, could you please clarify the relationship between Simon's Foundation and also Searchlight? Because I heard that from some people. It might be good to just explain what is the relationship or differences.
So the Simon Searchlight, or Wendy can clarify too, is funded by Safari. So it was previously in-house at Safari, and since Wendy's moved to BCH, some of the participant-facing activities have moved with Wendy to BCH to interface more with the clinic, and the data remains at the Simons Foundation. So it's really a partnership between the Simons Foundation and Wendy and her team at BCH.
But the hope is that you never realize this happened, because in fact, as this was going on, we really tried very hard to make sure that from the family's point of view, the participant point of view, you really didn't notice anything at all. And really, truly, nothing's happened except for some of my team. They get their paycheck from a different place, but otherwise, it really should be the same experience and the same data governance, the same everything else is in place, and the same stability from the Simons Foundation.
Fantastic.
Agreed.
Thank you for that added clarification. So, Marianne, I have a question for you. You have had a long journey, both personally and professionally, to improve diagnosis and care for people living with HHT. Could you please tell us about the different ways that you have been able to use data to accomplish your goals? And I know you have a lot of successful, fantastic, amazing accomplishment and story to share with us, and we would love to hear that.
Thank you. I'd say from a patient advocate standpoint and advocacy community, we really need to value your experience. I think it's very, very important. 5 years ago, we had no clinical trials. We had no registries, no biorepository. 5 years later, we've had 3 clinical trials, 2 repurposed drugs, 1 we're taking forward. And then a story that I want to share with you is a manifestation of the disease that we didn't even know existed until just about a year and a half ago. I happened to notice in the Women in HHT Facebook group that they were talking about heavy menstrual bleeding, severe hemorrhage after childbirth, hysterectomies in their 30s. And I said, this has not been described. So I teamed up with the hematologist who was our center director at UNC. We created a survey. 650 women answered. We had 70% of those women had anemia, heavy menstrual bleeding, hemorrhage after childbirth that had never been documented, which then led to a study being done at Mass General and Stanford comparing 100 medical charts looking at HHT and von Willebrand's disease, and was published in Blood Advances about 6 months ago, and was titled that HHT may be the most morbid inherited bleeding disorder in women. And this was not a manifestation ever interrogated. So since then, we have added questionnaires, we've added these questions to both registries, because this is vitally important and something that really all of our physicians need to be aware of, our patients need to be aware of.
Fantastic. That's great. Again, gets back to one of the remarks that Wendy made as far as better understanding phenotype, and you already having, based on your experience and your community experience, find one way that, and it's just amazing to add more clarity on the phenotype related to that your condition, and also particularly with respect to women. There are things that we know that may not be diagnosed if we don't look at it in a proper way, and I'm so glad. This is a very very encouraging, actually successful way to extract meaningful information from some data. Do you want to add more? Looks like, yeah.
In terms of the repurposed drugs or the?
Yeah, if you have any other examples, that's.
I do.
Sure, yes,
So,
I know.
So the big example that we have is there was a study that was started several years ago by GSK of a repurposed cancer drug. It was approved for kidney cancer at 800 milligrams. And this was a proof of concept trial for 30 patients. And it was at 50 milligrams in HHT, so a very low dose. And after 7 patients, it was really positive signals. The whole portfolio was sold to another company. And we advocated and pleaded, please continue the study, and they weren't interested. So we made the bold decision. I personally met with all 7 patients, and their anemia was reversed. And we're talking about people that are transfusion dependent, can't leave the house, and it transformed their lives, and it increased the quality of their life. So we made the bold decision, this drug was coming off patent, to invest $100,000 a year for $500,000. And we got rights to the generic form of the drug and went to the FDA. That gave us a breakthrough designation. We got 2 grants, one from the FDA, one from the DOD, totaling over $6.2 million. We now have a phase 3 trial that we will be completing our 80 patients in December, and we plan to take it all the way to registration. So we are running a trial from our own organization, not for the faint of heart. But we are really tired of not having any FDA-approved therapies. We've been really an orphan of the orphan. We were described in 1896. We were about 1 in 5,000 patients, and we had nothing. So our patients were desperate, and we are really excited about it because the signals are positive. They were positive in the proof of concept trial. And so everything is outsourced. We have a CRO, we have a drug manufacturer. Our costs doubled because this started pre-COVID, and then now after COVID, everything increased. So we took it in our own hands to move it forward because no one else was going to do it. And since then, we've received some attention, and we now have 8 active programs, and the biotechs and pharmas have found us. So that's our story.
Mm-hmm. That's a very impressive story.
Be bold. You can do it.
Thank you. That's amazing. So now I have a few more specific questions, but everyone is welcome to respond. So, question one is that, what are some successful use cases that you believe could demonstrate, again, short-term return from using data? Because again, as we all, as we discussed, focus of this panel is that we want to know, we want to better understand before waiting till that kind of a final goal, reaching final goal, ultimate goal, which obviously we are working toward that direction, every community drug discovery. But then how else, what are some other successful examples that data have been used, based on your experience, that you would like to share with us?
So I'll give one use case, and some of the team are out in the audience here, of something called KIF1A associated neurological disorder. And for that, that's for many of you a rare condition. We have about 500, 600 people worldwide that we know of with the condition. But we started to develop a treatment using an ASO, and starting for one person, but with the plan always to see if we could get to eventually everyone in the community. And with doing this, we needed to, it's unfortunately a degenerative condition, a neurodegenerative condition. And so we had to understand for everyone what that slope was like in terms of the degeneration, so that if we had a treatment, we'd be able to see, did we change that course? Did we stabilize things? Did we still decline, but maybe not as fast? Or potentially, did we even improve? And so the community came together in part to be able to get the quick wins. What could we do that would improve our care today? And we found out within that process many things in terms of issues with vision that we weren't aware of, or at least not as aware of, as well as some other things. And then as we got ready to do the first person with that treatment, we could then have really good data to be able to understand what the difference was. And in fact, that was the immediate question with the FDA, with reviewers, in terms of what would things have been like without the treatment, so that we knew, because we didn't do a randomized control clinical trial, although that's the sort of ultimate that we hope to get to. We literally started with one person and with very careful observation. And in doing that, there are also new data types. Just to plant the seed for some of you, we've realized that there are new types of data we need to collect. I call it digital data, or data that we collect from someone at home where they're doing what they normally do, not the artificial sort of scenario when we bring them into the hospital or in the clinic, but how do we see how they're functioning in daily life, and whether or not we're making a difference, and things are better or worse or the same with treatment. And so again, how do we have wearables? How do we have things where we're seeing how active people are, how they're feeling, but minimizing the burden as we're doing it? And I am pleased to say that for that, just one, but for that one person so far, we did make a difference. I think we improved many, many different dimensions. We're now having the second person under treatment with plans in terms of as many people as we can. But those learnings that start with one person, hopefully are plans in terms of being able to now have a strategy that might work for an entire community.
Fantastic. Yes. And actually, I think you read my mind, because that was my second question. So thank you. But I also wanted to see if, with respect to digital data, you mentioned some benefits, but as far as feasibility and also some of the challenges that you think that we need to at least keep in mind or monitor, or based on your experience or what you have heard from others who have used digital data?
Maybe we'll tag team on this. But one of the things for so I'm a pediatrician, many of the problems we have with kids are that some of the devices just aren't made in the size for kids, right? They're made largely for adults. And for some of you that may, be collecting your own digital data, it doesn't work necessarily for a 2-year-old in terms of doing that. So there's a whole thing we've got to do in terms of the industry to be able to do that. And we want to make devices so that if a child should accidentally eat it or ingest it, it's not going to be a problem. problem. Some kids that may have sensory issues or other things where they don't want to wear it or it bothers them, being able to think about how to do that. But there are things that are important. And I always start with the question, what's important to you? If you were to pick the 3 things that would be most important to you to change, what would those be? And then help me help you. How do we measure that? How do we see that? And the denser the data and the more reliable the data we can collect, the more sensitive we are to see a change within that. And so that's part of the reason for thinking about these things that are passively collecting tons of data, because if you're doing that, you can be very reliable on the data to know that even a small 2% change might be real. And so you can either say, fast fail in terms of something, fast no go or fast go, but make a decision very early on, because things like clinical trials are very expensive. And you want to be able to know early on if this treatment is working, you want to full steam ahead. And if it's not, you want to kill it and go on to the next thing that you can. And so we're trying to make for a robust, more economical way, because I think more shots on goal for some of you hopefully will get us to a safe, effective medication or treatment, I should say, sooner. And so we're trying to build that ecosystem to do that.
I can add to that absolutely. And I had written here, we have multiple shots on goal because you don't know what is going to work. And I also want to say that we can do any of this. We have a really close partnership with all of our physicians, our research community. We come together and we surveyed each team and found what is missing, what did we need to do to get us to advance at least some therapies moving forward. And the other piece to that is, with repurposing of drugs, one of the situations that we had, a lot of doctors were using them in our centers, and they were using them in their centers, and they came together and published 250 cases in addition to case studies, which led to another repurposed drug being approved for HHT by CMS and third-party payers. So it was teaming up with the physicians who gathered their data together, which made an impact.
I think the other thing in thinking about digital data is that a lot of the data can be collected at home. And I think about the challenge for a lot of families to get to a clinic or the site of a clinical trial. At Mount Sinai, we see people who are flying in from around the country, sometimes around the world, to participate, but that's a lot. And there's a lot of families who can't do that, or that's a big challenge. And even in-home things, like if we're thinking about sleep as an outcome, keeping a sleep diary is a lot to ask of someone to wait when your kid's already up and you have to log, or up from 3 to 3:27. That's a lot. If we can just record that, that takes burden off the family, in addition to giving us more precise data. So I think about sort of the accessibility. We can get more data from more people if we make at-home data collection available. And certainly there are challenges. There are challenges with the devices. There are challenges in terms of the FDA accepting those kind of data as an outcome measure. But I think there's a lot of hope and promise there too.
Exactly. And how about with respect to impact on diversity, and is it going to make it better, meaning addressing some of the existing, challenges to that and gaps that we experience with respect to data collection, particularly in rare diseases, and make sure that we collect data in an equitable way, and also we are inclusive enough. So what are your thoughts? What are your perspective with respect to that aspect of using digital data? Are there any added or unique maybe aspect that in this space that need to be taken into consideration, or any experience, any successful way to implement it to address diversity related issues and gaps?
I'll just double down on what Dr. Foss-Feig said, is that number one, every person matters. Let me just start with that. But especially within rare disease, we really need everyone to be able to participate because our numbers are so small that we really need to be able to move faster as a community. And with that, the people that get left behind are the people that don't have the resources to be able to go to a center that's doing these types of studies. They can't get time off of work. They can't pay for the travel. They don't have a second person to stay at home with their other child, whatever it is, but there are lots of barriers to that. And there tend to be bigger barriers between the haves and the have-nots. And so we're not representing really the full spectrum of everyone with challenges. And we might not be solving for the right problems as a result. The other thing, which I have to admit, and I'm embarrassed to say this as a physician, for individuals who come from different parts of the world, there are different ranges of quote unquote normal. So even things like, for instance, a blood count differs depending on what part of the world you come from. And so we have made, as doctors, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but we've made standards in terms of what's normal kidney function, what are normal blood counts, what are normal things, with normal being very much to individuals who come from a certain part of the world. And as a result, then certain individuals we think are sick, but they're not actually sick. They just have a different range of normal for their group, but that may lead us to overtreat or undertreat people depending on where in the world they come from. So it's just incredibly important that we're solving for everyone. We're not solving for people who can hop on a plane or be able to come to Sinai in terms of doing something, although we don't want to leave them behind. But we want to be able to collectively work together and use all of the resources that we have and make sure we don't leave anyone behind in that process.
I think for digital data too, you talked about at home. One important thing that we did as an organization, we worked with our physicians to develop an app so that patients were able to track their bleeding, their anemia, their whatever they were dealing with. So, and that app reminder comes on and you have to log. And that was really, really helpful for our patients. And really, as we get to trials, and as you get to trials, it is really worth the investment. Really important.
That's great. So in the interest of time, we still have time, and I have a few more questions, but I wanted to make sure we also have time for any question coming from the audience. So I believe, Kelly, do we have any questions from the audience? If not, we can continue, but just wanted to make sure. Oh, sorry, Marianne.
So I know a lot of people had trouble logging into the app, so we're going to do a live Q&A,
okay.
if that's all right. Are you all right?
Yes,
Can we start
no,
that?
that's perfect. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go one at a time, but please flag me down if you do have a question. Let's start over here. Hi, great panel. My name's Nasha from Fox G1 Research Foundation. I love all the stories. We are actually taking our first gene therapy as a foundation into the clinic, hopefully next year. And we are in the process of trying to figure out our endpoints. And it's a very interesting experience. And I love this idea of what you said on getting deeper into like what are patients actually going through at home and collecting that. And you talked about devices. And I think that the real struggle is which device, right? Like, and I get that the FDA hasn't approved, but I think you do have an opportunity to take good data to the agency and have them react to it. But there is no broad list, it seems, of devices that are a good idea to take. Every organization I talk to is experimenting with different things. So I'm not sure from your experiences if you can share, or, you know, if we could even put somewhere that we could all look into, like what are the breathing devices or the, you know, for sleep. Like there's just so many different things out there. It's really hard for a foundation because any device we take and experiment with is an investment of time, money, resources, etc. So love that, to hear that.
I think we can riff between us. So I don't know that there's a standard at this point, especially when it comes for children and children with neurodevelopmental behavioral conditions. I think there are multiple reasons why that's challenging. I'm happy to talk with anyone offline. We're just now starting to get to try this really in a meaningful way. At the Simons Foundation and Spark, we've started to try this with sleep. We're starting to try this with some of the rare conditions that are things that I happen to study. I can talk to you. There are folks that I think do this pretty well within neurological conditions for adults. I haven't seen any well that has an off-the-shelf package for children with neurodevelopmental conditions. So I think we're going to have to, and I'd actually encourage us collectively to work together within this because your condition is very similar to 300 other conditions, and we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. We can divide and conquer.
I think when we think about the devices, one thing to look for is whether the raw data are available, because a lot of things are started by a company who may or may not keep producing the product. So if the data are behind algorithms of analysis, and that's what you give, if those devices go away, then so too does the meaning in your data. So I think one sort of benchmark is whether you get the raw data, though of course there are many, many devices. In the sleep study that Wendy referenced that we did in Spark, we collected data with a headband, with a wristband, and with a mat that goes under the mattress. And so those data are available in hopes that people will start analyzing what data do we get from each of those devices, what's reliable, what can you get from just, say, a mat under the mattress, which will collect data from most people. And so we hope that will give us some resolution around sort of the types of devices and what you might get.
And I'll just riff off of that because Safari is very much committed to open data science. And one of the things is there are two steps within this process, in my opinion. Part of it is the data collection, and then another part of it is the data analysis. And I think there are many researchers that are not good at the data collection, but they're good at the data analysis. And so collectively, again, we could put our heads together to think about what are those that can best analyze, whether it be video data, audio data, sleep data, EEG data. There are different data types, but in doing this, we could do this more effectively and more cost effectively together faster.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a great question. Paul Howard, Amicus Therapeutics. Just to follow up on that in terms of the small patient populations, and we can't go big, but we can go deep, and especially at the level of patient variation that we see in a lot of these rare diseases. Oftentimes, the regulatory approval process founders on that high interpatient variability. How can we use digital tools along with EMR and genetic data and imaging to really help us understand that variability, maybe even help the patient become their own control, something I think the FDA has grappled with, but maybe not has moved as quickly as we'd like on?
So I personally would focus on one of the last things you said. I think of study designs where the person is their own control. I think are probably some of the most robust in terms of thinking about this, depending on what the natural history of the course is and whether you're at steady state and what part of the disease process you're in. So that personally would be something I at least consider within all of these. Sometimes hard to do depending on what the therapy is and if you have to have a run-in period or a crossover, yada, yada, yada. And you know what I mean by that. There's a separate question, which is the variability across a community, which I'm deeply interested in, but don't know if we're powered to do in many cases. And I'll just put in that as a geneticist, one would think I would immediately jump to genetics, and I sometimes do, but I'm increasingly concerned about social determinants of health and where people are able to access care and who their care teams and other things are, accounting for quite a bit of that variability. And but you need to get some reasonable sample sizes to be able to see that and be sure of that. But I've got a hunch that that's equally, in some cases, contributing significantly.
I agree. And sometimes there may be a lot of variability within groups, but there's some similarities across groups. And not all treatments will be genetic treatments. And there may be some information that can be gained in understanding what's unique to a patient and how that might relate to another patient with another disorder, and are there treatments that can work across as well.
Hi, you had mentioned that there was an app that that some parents and patients use to collect data. Do you have examples of that or where you could look that up?
So our disease is multi-organ, and so it affects the brain, the lung, the GI, the nose, most commonly nosebleeds, in the family. And so the app that we developed, is basically tracking bleeding, tracking anemia, tracking iron infusions, those kinds of measures, since that's the chronic part of the disease. The brain and the lung issues can be treated if people are aware of them, and those are like the hemorrhaging, the what I call the ticking time bombs, but it's the chronic bleeding over time. So that's what we developed with a third party at Ann Arbor, as well as a team of our physicians, to make sure that we were collecting the right data and that it was meaningful.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer that.
Okay, I have one more question then.
I'm going to bring you back your microphone. So
Oh, that's okay.
Share.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. So I saved a couple questions for the last part. With respect to global data collection, because you mentioned that in the end, we know that there are, particularly in this space, rare disease, that's one of the approaches that we have used, all of us, and we want to be as inclusive as we can. But again, are there any specific kind of a recommendation that you have based on some of the, again, challenges with respect to making sure as far as study design and also collection of data to fit with the needs or different, basically, community? I mean, we address those upfront. Are there any suggestion, any recommendations?
So it's the globe is big. So as I do this, I don't want to overgeneralize. There are some issues with data in Europe in terms of GDPR and what is allowable from a regulatory point of view. So that becomes just more difficult. One has to think about it, and especially pharmaceutical companies, as they're thinking about clinical trials and things, that becomes a much bigger burden. I think in a good way, the world has gotten smaller when we think about Google Translates and other ways of being able to translate information, whether I'm sure many of you do it within your own communities. And so I think in a good way, more information is being transmitted. I will say there's some limitations of those translations, though. And so although they're at a high level, the idea gets across. Some of the nuances sometimes of language and what we mean by questions can be a little bit tricky. And so one of the things when we have standardized behavioral assessments, for instance, that have very standardized questions, you can't just simply do Google Translate and be able to translate those over. They're not considered valid. And for the regulatory agencies that would look at those as outcome measures, you can't just do a simple port over. So that becomes a little bit more challenging. There are also differences, big differences, when I think about parts of the third world in terms of what you can do and how communities want to be involved and what their sense is in terms of community governance, who you have to go to get tribal council to be able to, for instance, agree to research, portions of the community that consider really, especially when it comes to genetics, a community affair, not a single person. And so you have to be quite respectful of those cultures and to realize that not everyone is like I am, and that's okay. But to be able to go through in a way that really resonates with how their community wants to be able to engage with research. So it's hard to come up with one single answer, but things can be complicated. But again, for rare diseases, we've all got to come together. We're too small in number, or at least the known numbers, and we don't want to leave anyone behind.
I wanted to add something.
I'd say the basic science can happen anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the patient recruitment or engagement in a clinical trial may be more difficult across the globe, modeling a condition in an animal or in a cell can happen elsewhere. So having a global eye when you're thinking about research, I think, is really important as well.
Exactly. So then again, it's just a matter of thinking about some of the elements that need to be taken into consideration as far as study design and also some parameters. And also, I'm glad that, Wendy, you mentioned about engagement. The engagement element also similar to any other approaches is not that we have one size fit all. And it's not even talking about communities from different parts of the world. We are also engagement with respect to engaging different type of players, different type of groups of stakeholders, engagement of pharma groups versus basic researchers versus clinicians, and also families requires different messaging, different ways of making sure that their needs are being met. And I think that's I'm so glad, actually, particularly in this space, that I see we are moving towards having more and more connectivity between patient engagement and also science of engagement in general, and also basic research that we used to kind of practice, speaking of myself, and I think it applies to you, Jennifer. 20 years ago, we were just focusing on just what are the principles for analyzing genomic or epigenomic data, which is fine. But then beyond that, if we want to work with patients, we have to also equip ourselves with some knowledge about the science of engagement and community engagement. I think it's becoming more and more important, and I'm glad to see that. So if there are no more questions, the final it's not a question, but I would like to ask all of you that as far as your final thoughts and takeaways for this discussion that you would like to share with our audience. What is the most important insight you would like the audience to remember, or action that you would like them to take? And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Wendy or...
So I want you to know there's hope. That as I look forward in terms of the many new technologies that I can see on the horizon, there are bright futures ahead. And to be able to get there in the time frame you're going to want to, we have to think ahead strategically. And to do that over the next 10 years means we have to be preparing now for when we have the opportunity to be able to use those technologies. And so it really is a good thing for us to prepare now to understand what I call sort of the normal state, the sort of current state, so we can prepare for that future state. But I want to leave you with, there really is hope. And it is spectacular, some of the technologies that I can see coming down the road for genetic conditions that really, I think, can be transformative within the next decade. And it is important for us to be able to be ready as those technologies are available.
I think a step back in the pipeline to some of the basic science research and the importance of getting your data, getting information about your condition to where it can be seen. There are researchers developing really exciting technologies and tools, looking for diseases to apply it in. And if there's information about your disorder, about your disease out there, they may just jump on your condition and make that their career. So I feel hopeful as a function of there being so many researchers who come to us saying, we're really excited about this. This seems to make sense in neurodevelopment. Help us understand what model should we work in. We're looking to apply for funding, and there's a lot of people wanting to jump in.
And I'm going to tag team on that and say hope leads to change. And I can't speak enough about the value of collaboration. It's really critical. We have to collaborate, and that really, by ensuring that you're valuing your work, you're valuing your voice, because really patients are at the center, and through collaboration with basic translational science and clinical research, that's where the advances in therapeutics and cures will be.
Fantastic. And I wanted to add one more takeaways that I think it would be good to keep in mind, and that is that with respect to, again, focus of our topic of our panel discussion, I believe that it's important to know that making the most out of data is an evolving process, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And we can achieve the greatest benefits of by continuously adapting and refining how we use data, and also more important than that, doing what we just did during this, we learned from our panelists, is that learning from successful cases which were made possible by through the collective efforts and collaborative efforts of all the players, including researchers, clinicians, policymakers, industry, and of course, patient advocates. So I think that having that kind of approach and ecosystem, as you mentioned, I think those are all other elements that make the data usability actually possible or take it to the next level. So thank you so much for our panelists for the very informative discussion, and also for the audience for the questions and involvement. Thank you very much.